All right, here for the Australian podcast review. It just happened earlier this morning if you're on the East Coast, and a lot of things occurred in this race, much more than has happened in almost the last two seasons. Oi, oi, oi! And I mean, there was so many there was so many story points to what happened. I mean, the first being at the start of the race. Are you aware of what exactly happened? Was it a brake pad issue that had Max Verstappen retire out of the race? Hmm. Yeah, and while he was coming into the pit, it like spit out a bunch of black arid dust on the side of the pit lane. But yeah, and he seemed pretty furious, but I mean, with the amount of luck he's had over the last two seasons, the big story really was after having his appendix removed only about 2 weeks ago and Ollie Behrman getting into the Ferrari and having such a good result. This is really Carlos Sainz stamping himself after the last couple of races as the number one driver in the team for right now, even though he's not signed for next season. You know what? It's interesting that point you just brought up. But Sergio Perez, in a post race interview, this was kind of odd. He said that he and Max both knew that they weren't going to win the race, even with what happened, that the Ferraris was too quick for the Red Bull team. I thought that was a very big omission to make from somebody like that in the team. Sergio Perez. Yes. Yeah. And I know, and it made me start to wonder too. So Science has this win. Before the appendix surgery, he actually had been doing better in the last two races than Leclerc. Okay, this is a guy who's not signed. We thought he was going to go to, or he had connections with Audi and stuff. Now you have a seat open at Mercedes, and you have Sergio Perez has been doing really well, but then gets sixth place here. If Sergio Perez drops off and is not as consistent for the rest of the season, Sainz already has a relationship with Red Bull and Max, and Mercedes has this huge seat open for it, and they don't have really a young guy that could come in that they have connections to that they're just going to put in that seat. This guy is the most seasoned guy. And on top of this, even more, I found out this statistic myself doing some research. Leclerc's last win was Austria in 2022 in July. since that time, Carlos Sainz is the only two victories Ferrari has had. I believe it's his third. Uh, he won the British Grand Prix, this Grand Prix in Singapore, and this is his third race. I think Leclerc has something like 5 or maybe 6 wins. Yeah, that's becoming. It's either that or one and done. It seems like in Formula One, but it's just such a weird uh, situation with Sainz now because I think everybody agrees that Leclerc is probably a more talented driver, but he's just not all mentally there. He seems exhausted at some points, and then Carlos Sainz, he's like one of these guys that once there's no more pressure anymore, he's just rising to the occasion. I think he'll probably win another race and easily beat Leclerc in the championship, and it'd be odd. Yeah, go ahead. It's so odd. He's like the hottest free agent in Formula One right now after this victory. If he continues this trend the entire season. No, no. Get seventh place or sixth. Yeah. Mm-hmm. A lot of people got over on Perez at the start. It seemed like. Yeah, I think the biggest story, other than the whole signs and Max Verstappen being out, was do you think McLaren is really back in the frame? I mean, they seem to have these Grand Prix where they do exceptionally well and then they fall off a little bit. Or do you think this is consistently going to happen coming forward, that they'll be up fighting for podiums? Uh, you know what? I'd have to check, but I thought for a second that you're going to see Piastri on the podium, which would have been huge at home because I don't think Ricardo's never won the Australian Grand Prix or was able to have much success there. But for Lando Norris, the last podium he has is Singapore in 2023. Yep. Go ahead. I was just, you know what? When I watched it this morning on replay, he was in the paddock, and I said in my own mind, I said, when is the drop happening? Because you got Yuki Tsunoda getting into Q1 and then having decent races. I mean, where Tsunoda finished seventh in this Grand Prix, Ricardo finished 12th with another lap. And the only people who finished behind Ricardo were the people who had crashed out, retired, the Alfa Romeos and the Alpines. So when is it going to happen? He lost it well before this season. He's 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 out of it. It's nothing wrong with the car. It's wrong with the driver. And Liam Lawson being there in the paddock and the amount of results he got last season, where they should have for a team that is so about gambling and taking big risks to get big rewards. It was so depressing last season to see him have such great results just come into the car and them not sign him for this season. I think you gave Ricardo his shot in Australia. They love him so much that they're going to give him a couple more. I don't think they'll do the axe after this Grand Prix, but I would say in the next six races, if there is not a major turnaround, so that would be Japan, China, Miami, Emilia Romano, Monaco, Canada. If he doesn't have results by Canada, they'll change out for the Spanish Grand Prix. So maybe you think three races? Too many. Yep. You know what? I have to push back a little bit. Nico Hulkenberg and Kevin Magnussen, what a race. They've put their team now ahead of Williams, what's the other team? Alpine and Alfa Romeo with the points that Nico Hulkenberg just got. Now he's got them with Kevin Magnussen in this race. That was a pretty good effort by them to get past the Williams of Alex Albon. Lewis Hamilton. Yeah, and Lewis Hamilton, so it'd be even more out. But you know what? Here's a big question I need to pose to you. Okay, the thing with the Williams this weekend, I mean, I don't think it's that as controversial as everyone's making it out. They didn't have another car, and Alex Albon's clearly the number one driver there. But does this spell the end for Logan Sargent at the end of this season? Yeah. Well, speaking of number two drivers, I keep having this idea, and we talked about this earlier, that Fernando Alonso possibly could have a seat maybe at a Mercedes or something for one season. But when he has great races, Lance Stroll would have finished right behind him had he not gotten that 20-second penalty. Lance Stroll just shows up and sometimes is right behind Fernando Alonso, who clearly is much more consistent. But it kind of devalues his result because people think a driver like Lance Stroll can be right behind you. Maybe it's more of just having a great car this season in the last couple of seasons with Aston Martin. Hmm. Yeah. No, he probably has a safer seat than even Max Verstappen at this point. The other news that, well, not news necessarily, but gossip that I was reading an article about was that this Alfa Romeo team has been performing so poorly this season, even worse than last season probably. And the owner had been quoted as saying that he actually wanted to get rid of both of the drivers, and he wanted to get rid of Bottas last season too. On top of everything, nothing. Yeah, and honestly, with the amount of talent out there right now, listen, you have Zhou Guan Yu for the Chinese Grand Prix. If he doesn't improve anything, drop both of these guys. Get these F2 guys. Get go nab what was the Brazilian guy from Aston Martin, Filipe Drogovic, and then take who Theo Portier or Ollie Behrman or something. You could have two really top notch F2 drivers replace both of these guys who can't get anything really done. And Botas, like you're saying, he's following the old Botas handbook. He came to them on a 3-year deal. The first year, he outperformed everything by getting like 95% of their points. I think he scored something like 50 points for the team with all these great results. And then as soon as that guy gets comfortable somewhere, he's the exact opposite of Carlos Sainz. He gets comfortable. He just starts sucking terribly. And even when he gets his back up against the wall, he just can't cope with it. I think they should probably drop both of these guys at the end of the season. If not in the mid, I mean, I guess Botas has a contract. They'll finish out the season, but you could really have a great team. Yes. Yes. That is the big question. Does Sergio Perez, because this Grand Prix was a step back, he had been doing so well qualifying and everything. His start was bad. He was not able to climb back up and maintain even a podium position for the team. If he is inconsistent, is he being sacked for someone from the team, or are they going to go searching for an already top driver? But really, I mean, I don't think they trust Sonoda enough to put him in the seat, even if he beats Ricardo. If they put Liam Lawson in, like you said, if Liam Lawson beat him straight out, would be great. But what if Yuki Tsunoda like that turns him up even more, and he starts getting great results too? Then you could justify that action. But we'll have to see this season, really. Yeah, really. Yeah, and he stayed back for most of the race. It was some battles between the McLaren. Obviously, eventually towards the end, Oscar Piastri moved away for Lando Norris, who thought he would be able to maybe hunt down Charles Leclerc. But what was it? A two-stop race? It seemed like it was very hot in Australia, and that any tire other than the hards were graining pretty quickly. Yeah, right. With the tire, of course. Yeah. No, and did you ever see at any point that Leclerc? I don't know if he couldn't, but there was no attempt at. Never saw any radio messages where they were going to try some strategy to get past Sainz or at least come and battle him. It just seemed like Carlos Sainz controlled this race from the beginning to the end. No. Yep. Here's a question too. Was this a one-off for Ferrari? The amount of pace they had at this, I mean, is the championship entirely over? I know Red Bull is more consistent, but uh, will this further continue at other circuits, or what do you believe? Japan. Structure of it, or is that the? Yeah. But yeah, speaking of the issues of an accident, now at the end of the race, George Russell was he trying? Because I'm not completely square on this, and I've read a couple articles on this. He was trying to pass Alonso and lost it, but then they claimed it was Alonso's fault or something. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But that's what it was. So do you believe that's a justified penalty then? Of course. Okay. Well, yeah, well, what you say is true though, because you were saying it might not look like that on TV to viewers, but when they assessed the penalty, they went into like the telemetry and the data on the car to make sure that it was a justified penalty given to Alonso. So they looked at that intently before they actually demoted him. Hmm. Yeah, it's much harder to do it here with the way the stewards are, but I agree with what you're saying. He could make it more difficult for his life whenever next situation between the two of them is. So, in general, though, this race, I think this was a pretty positive, big takeaway, like you said at the beginning, that we've actually finally seen a race where even if Max Verstappen hadn't had an issue, many believe that Ferrari would still win. Is the season going forward? I mean, we can't tell ourselves, but I don't know. I have a feeling like the season going forward is going to be more exciting now. No, but some by Ferrari is it would is been well. Do you think if it's a victory, that's not from either Red Bull or Ferrari. You think McLaren will get a victory before a Mercedes at this point with the way the team's going? Yeah, it just appeared this weekend. Like Lewis was quoted as saying he's never been um, less confident in himself or something like that. And just George Russell's trying everything to be the good face because it just seems like a dark cloud with Lewis and the whole team right now. And with his pull and that and his championships and everything, yeah, it is a very much of a Debbie Downer type of thing. But all it reinforces to me is like, man, he made the right move again. The Ferrari is never looking better, and the Mercedes has never looked worse. It was very early on. That dominant, yeah. And Lewis Hamilton, when he pulled off there, I guess they had to do the virtual safety car, even though he was at a cutout. Because did they have to do that? Because there were workers that had to come out and push him off, and at that point they were on the side grass where the cars are coming by. Hmm. Yes, I believe he did get fastest lap. But yeah, it's just it was a much more exciting Grand Prix, not just from the front, but also the middle and the mid tier, and even, I mean, I guess at the end, the part really was the Haas and everything battling out with the Williams, which was the most exciting thing towards the end. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that was, and he followed that, and he knew what the thing was and everything. But yeah, no, it was an impressively interesting race. It was one of the first we hadn't done live. That's why we did this podcast for it. But we will be doing the next Grand Prix. It's one of the best Grand Prix of the season, the Japanese Grand Prix. Jesus, I didn't hear. I didn't have the sound. I heard the sound when Max went out and signs went by. I guess you would be right because that. When's the last time an Aussie was on the podium in Australia? I mean, you could essentially see wherever Ricardo finished on the podium as the last of that happening, or maybe even. I don't think Mark Webber ever got on the podium in Australia. Jeez. Yeah. Yeah, and they've been having that nonstop. An interesting statistic here: Mark Webber and Daniel Ricciardo have never been on the podium in Australia. I don't know the last time an Australian was on the podium. That would have to go back far, probably the '90s or something like that. But yeah, no, that's pretty much the sum up of the entire Grand Prix right there. Everything we talked about. Yes, Magnussen, and then Hulkenberg in ninth. Yeah, yeah, that's what I would have assumed. Yeah, it's not glorious. You're not coming through at speeds and everything, and that was a shame for Signs at the end there. So Carlos Sainz, his third ever victory for Ferrari. He's still technically behind Leclerc in the championship because of his absence at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. And then we've got coming in second place a Ferrari 1-2 with Charles Leclerc. When's the last time Ferrari had a 1-2 anyways? I couldn't tell you. And his teammate in fourth, Oscar Piastri. And then you had Sergio Perez finish up in fifth. Lance Stroll finish up in sixth. Yuki Tsunoda, seventh place for a great Alpha Tauri. Fernando Alonso coming in a great eighth position. He was demoted two down. Nico Hulkenberg up in ninth position. Kevin Magnussen up in 10th position. Two separate points winners for them. And then you had Albon in 11th in one of his last cars. A terrible result for Ricardo in 12th. Gasly 13th. Bottas 14th. Zhou Guanyu 15th. Ocon 16th. Russell 17th. Lewis Hamilton 18th. Verstappen 19th. Fastest lap was actually Leclerc. But thanks everybody for tuning in. Come check us out for the Japanese Grand Prix. And thank you very much. You did for a little bit, but I just rounded out the complete finish of everything. Just to say at the end, too, I went through the entire order there. Charles Leclerc ended with the fastest lap, not Lando Norris. About 20 or 30 seconds ago, but I just rounded out the entire thing. But I was letting them know that Charles Leclerc had the fastest lap, and the Japanese Grand Prix will be 2 weeks from now, and we'll do a live stream for that. That's one of my favorite Grand Prix of the season. And like Big Guy said, what were you saying that they were so fast in Australia? That would mean that they'd probably be fast in Japan too, right? No, and that was an impressive team. I think Hulkenberg took the team right there, pushed them forward, brought Magnussen with him. I thought that was very impressive, that whole situation. Yeah, Gunther Steiner's been relegated to awkward podium interviews now. Yes. Yeah, I don't think that's the best move. I think they've lost focus, and now they've actually. It might have been good for them that Max had an issue there because I think what Perez said was right. They might have just been beaten today by outright speed and just the way the Ferraris were. So we'll have to see at the next race, but maybe they should start focusing back on what they were doing before because all of this stuff has caused them to slide back a little bit, which is incredible to say after the two races they had prior. Hmm. Yep. And we'll be back in 2 weeks for the Japanese Grand Prix. Eastern Standard Time, it will be around 1 a.m., another late race, as well as China after that. But whatever time zone you're in, check us out. Thank you guys very much.